chart pattern, downward gap. If we see a noticeable drop in the visibility for a domain between 1 week and the next, and the domain falls through the bottom limit of their trend channel without quickly recovering again, then we call this pattern a downward gap. If you notice this kind of chart pattern, then you should particularly look at 3 possible events which might be the cause. First, the domain might have a technical problem, or there might be errors on the website itself, where content might have been deleted or kept from being indexed, for example. Second, the domain might have been on the wrong end of a Google update or manual action. And a third possibility is that of a domain relaunch or redesign gone bad. This third possibility is likely the easiest and, at the same time, most common cause, which is why you should check for it first. Here we have the visibility history for the website for the Mayor of London, complete with a downward gap in December 2015. If you are responsible for a website, then you will certainly be aware that a relaunch or redesign has taken place. As an outsider, you are able to run a Google query for newwebsitelondon.gov.uk, for example. This will quickly steer you to a press release from November 27, 2015, which lets us know that the new homepage for the Mayor of London has gone live. This event may very well explain the loss in visibility 1 week later, on December 7, 2015. During our day-to-day evaluations, we also found a way that will usually yield results even sooner using the toolbox. For this, just use the Check Availability feature in the Linked Pages menu in the toolbox. If you are greeted by a bloodbath of red 404 error codes, you're usually correct in assuming that the technical aspect of a redesign went haywire. If you see a mix of 30x redirects and 404 pages, then it is a good idea to follow some of the 30x redirects and check if they lead to the new subpage with the actual content, or if they are redirected to a category page or even the start page, both of which Google will see as a soft 404 error. If you click on the little button in front of the URL, we will send you straight to that page. The problems that come with a website relaunch or redesign are nearly always the same and can practically be seen each and every week on one domain or another. A redesign will often be accompanied by a new CMS system or shop software. Sadly, these new systems often have the bad habit of generating all new URLs. The thing is, the old URLs are the ones that have the rankings. Google identifies a domain by their URLs and associates the ranking signals with them. So, when you generate new URLs, you're essentially throwing away your current rankings, and you can be sure that the new URLs will not yet have the same amount of signals and rankings as the old ones. This is how you get a downward gap. You can easily negate this problem by using 301 redirects pointing from each of the old URLs to their new counterpart. Think of it as a change of address notification, which Google is very good at understanding, and this will usually keep the rankings for your domain intact. We are well aware that during the hectic times of implementing a website redesign, many webmasters may be inclined to shy away from the work of setting up the redirects, especially if this has to be done by hand. But please keep in mind that this job is absolutely essential. If need be, get temporary help and at least redirect the most important 1000 URLs with 301 redirects. Most of the times, this will already be quite the lifesaver. If you're working on much larger websites, then you'll need to redirect more URLs, of course. In order to identify and prioritize these important URLs, you can use data from the SISTRIX Toolbox or the Google Search Console, where the most important pages are those with either the best rankings, the most external links, or both. We can use the toolbox to take a detailed look at the problems that showed up thanks to the new website design for the Mayor of London. In order to do so, we go to Keywords in the left-hand navigation, switch to the standard data, and choose a date before the relaunch. If we click on the link button in front of the URLs, we will notice that many of these pages now return a 404 status code. This means that the page with this specific URL is not available anymore and has not been redirected to the new URL. The rankings and backlinks for this URL have therefore been lost. If your Google search does not unearth a press release about a redesign or relaunch, then you can also use the Wayback Machine at archive.org. There you can see snapshots of how a website looked at a specific time in the past. By comparing such a snapshot to the current version of the website, you will also be able to figure out whether there were any changes on the domain. If your evaluation eliminates a redesign as the culprit for the downward gap, then your next suspect would be a Google update or manual action. The toolbox will automatically mark official Google updates with an event pin, as we see here for currencyconverter.org.uk. At pin D, Google released their Penguin Update number 1, which should definitely be taken into consideration as the possible cause of the downward gap. The goal of the Penguin Update is to fight web spam by identifying unnatural and purchased backlinks for a domain and taking corrective actions against these domains. You will find more on the Penguin Update in our Ask SISTRIX knowledge base, where we also show you how to check if your domain was affected by this Google update. Looking back at currencyconverter.org.uk, it really was the Penguin Update which was responsible for the loss in visibility. In this case, it is interesting to note that this domain worked hard on trying to clean up their act for over a year and a half before they were released from the Penguin Update. There are not many domains which actually managed to escape the Penguin. When we look at this domain, we see a similar site but no event pins, as this downward gap was not caused by an official Google update. Here we actually have a manual action taken by Google against this domain. It is highly likely that the manual action was due to the large number of external links that the domain had purchased in order to manipulate Google's rankings. Google will actually send the webmaster a message about a manual action through the Google Search Console if they have registered their domain with the Search Console. If you do not have access to the Search Console for a domain, then you can use the ranking distribution within the toolbox to get an inkling of whether a manual action is at work. Just click on Ranking Distribution in the left toolbox navigation. Google will usually show 10 organic results per search engine results page, also called SERP. In this graph, you can see how the domain's rankings are distributed within the top 100 results, which are the first 10 result pages. If we look at the distribution for the above domain, at the time of the downward gap, we notice that the first 3 results pages are completely void of any domain rankings. The first rankings show up on the 4th result page, which is a rather surefire sign that a manual action has taken hold. This site here is a pretty brutal storybook example for a manual action. Most of the time, you're pretty safe to assume that a manual action is at fault if, during the time of the downward gap, a domain shows less than 3% of their rankings on the first search result page. When you're looking at large and extensive websites, you should try and look at the ranking distribution for specific directories and topics, as otherwise you might not be able to notice the effect when there is a very wide base of rankings available for the domain. This is due to the fact that Google may decide to initiate manual actions only against specific subdomains, directories, or for specific keywords. When we look at the visibility history for the UK flower delivery website serenataflowers.com, we can see that it took them about 2 months to get rid of the manual action. They worked on cleaning up their link profile for their website and then asked Google to reconsider their action by filling out a reconsideration request. These requests can only be used when a manual action has been taken, and you can find everything you need to know about reconsideration requests in our Ask SISTRIX knowledge base. The third possible cause for a downward gap are technical problems or a loss of content on the website, as can be seen here for Apple. Strictly speaking, we're actually looking at a number of downward gaps in short progression. Apple managed to lose about 1/3 of their visibility within Google's search results in just a few weeks. If you take a closer look at Apple, you will find neither a relaunch nor a penalty as the culprit for their downward gap. When you come across such a domain, it makes sense to look at the domain visibility by host names or directories in order to better localize the problem. To do so in the toolbox, simply click on either host names or directories in the left-hand navigation. As far as Apple is concerned, we get the most notable results when we check out the host names. It quickly becomes apparent that only the red line crashed, which is the iTunes subdomain on apple.com. This subdomain is home to the millions of pages with apps, songs, records, films, audiobooks, and much more that are available through iTunes. Neither the blue www.apple.com nor the green support.apple.com lines show any sign of the gap, which leaves us with the certainty that the problems were limited to the iTunes subdomain. Now all we have to do is figure out what happened to iTunes. The easiest way for this is by using the SISTRIX optimizer, which will check a domain specifically for technical errors and typical SEO mistakes. When this downward gap first showed up, we sent the subdomain itunes.apple.com through the optimizer and promptly got an answer to our question of what happened. Our crawler noticed that after a specific amount of page requests, Apple's servers only answered new requests with a 403 status code. This meant that the server was actively forbidding the crawler to request additional URLs, leaving it out in the cold. Apple had put major server-side restrictions on crawlers requesting the pages. We can only speculate on what Apple was doing, but one thing that they seemingly had not thought about was the fact that this measure was also keeping out Google's crawlers. If Google is unable to crawl content, then they're not able to index this content, which then means they cannot show it in the search results. This was the simple source behind Apple's massive ranking loss. Technical mistakes like these can usually only be noticed while they're still live. Once these mistakes have been fixed, it's not possible for outsiders to figure out why the rankings took a hit anymore. All traces will have been erased, and all you are left with is the knowledge that the visibility took a hit at a specific point in time, but not why. For this reason, it makes sense to set up an automatic monitoring for your important websites and keep an archive of the reports. This way you can document and analyze technical errors, even if the underlying cause has already been fixed. The SISTRIX optimizer will automatically take care of this without you having to do more than take a few minutes to set up a project. There are a number of additional mistakes that we see time and time again when it comes to downward gaps. Oftentimes, the crawling of content will be forbidden through a simple entry with the robot's txt file for a domain. Other times, important pages will use a no-index instruction and thereby forbid Google from adding those pages to the index. This is often the case when a test page goes live and someone forgot to first remove the no-index instruction. Other problems come from the incorrect use of the canonical tag. All of these are possible causes which should be checked for if you assume that technical problems are the cause for a downward gap. In the end, we also want to give you a few ideas of when you are not looking at a typical downward gap. If a domain's visibility shows a noticeable downturn but manages to stay within an intermediate trend channel, then there is no reason to first jump to the conclusion that a penalty or technical error is at fault. It may simply be a case of Google adjusting a few rankings, or there may have been a change on the website which temporarily cost the domain some rankings. Only when the intermediate trend channel is not able to work as a barrier anymore and the visibility gap goes through the bottom, then you are faced with a real downward gap and should take a detailed look at what caused this to happen. In case you are looking at new or very small domains, as well as very local or niche websites where the toolbox was not able to find many rankings, then you should usually not invest any time into running a chart analysis. In cases like this example here, with only 2 indexed pages, we simply do not have enough data available to run useful evaluations. Without a broad base, small changes for very few keywords can have large implications on the visibility graph. For these websites, it makes much more sense to invest the time into getting any visibility at all, or at least a somewhat stable visibility for the website. A good start would be to run a competitor analysis with the toolbox in order to identify the strongest websites within a segment or industry. You can then analyze these domains with the toolbox and get a blueprint for the type of content, keywords, and links which are needed in order to achieve success. Alternatively, you could set up your very own keyword set to track in the SISTRIX optimizer in order to ensure a broader databases for the domain.